Hello, Star Friends, and welcome to Starfinder Wednesdays. I am Amanda Hammond. I am the managing developer for Starfinder.
And I'm Jake Tondro. I'm an AP developer.
And we're here today to talk about ending your campaigns in whatever form that might take. And we're here to talk about that in general. And we are live. Just a reminder that we are live on Paizo's Twitch channel. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can come find us on Twitch. Wednesdays at 4 p.m. for Starfinder Wednesdays. We'll be answering your questions here on Twitch today and hopefully giving you some fun and exciting information for when your campaign starts to come to a close.
Yeah, we're gonna use Attack of the Swarm as kind of an example because the 6th adventure in that AP has just come out, the God Host Ascends. But really what we're trying to do here today is kind of provide a bunch of advice or ideas for your campaign at large, regardless of what game you're running or what kind of campaign it is. And if you have questions, please ask them because we'll just be taking questions throughout the whole stream today.
That's right. So anything that might come into your head while we're talking about
That's
all
right.
of this crazy stuff, we are happy to talk about, unless we aren't, in which we will just ignore your question. Thanks, guys.
No.
So just starting off with a brief discussion of Attack of the Swarm, we actually have at the end of all of our APs in the 6th volume, we have a continuing the campaign article that does exactly what we are doing here, but is very specific to the campaign.
Yeah, and this one actually has a whole page of like little small plot hooks that are from all the entire AP, all the way through the AP, picking up ideas that you can continue on beyond 12th level, because this you get to 13th, right? You get to 13th at the end of this adventure. But then there's also 2 major continuations. We don't want to go into spoilery details here. After you have confronted the God Host.
Confronted. We're not even telling you what happened.
After you have done that thing, there are a couple of big ways that the adventure can continue, and we provide some stat blocks and some of the necessary game mechanics and an outline of what that campaign would look like, so that your campaign doesn't have to end. But sometimes your campaign ends and you don't have a choice, right? Sometimes you can't control that. We have sort of 3 basic categories of how campaigns end. You have the planned ending, like a Starfinder AP. We're like, okay, we're going to play these 6 adventures. We're going to get to adventure 6, and we're all going to hit 13th level. We're going to face the God Host. We're going to kick the swarm off Suskalon, and that's the campaign. And that might take us 12 months, or it might take us a year and a half. It depends on how long we can play each set, how often we can meet. Maybe we're going to try to cram it into a short time. But we have an ending, and we know that ending is going to happen, so we can plan for that ending. Yes. That's type 1. And then the second type is a sort of accidental campaign ending, where you actually TPK the entire party. Like, oops, everyone's dead.
Yes.
What do I do now? Is the campaign over? Does everybody walk out?
Yeah, or potentially one of those accidental types of endings could also be that the players have just made choices that have allowed them to confront what is essentially the end boss in the adventure way before it's intended. So maybe they skip some encounters, they come up with a non-standard solution, or they are doing something that is starting to creep into a homebrew aspect of the adventure.
If the players decide that they're going to nuke it from orbit, right, and they could end the campaign quite early. And then the third one, and this is something I think we probably have all had a lot of experience with, is this situation of death of a campaign by attrition, where
meaning the players, not the characters.
But the players slowly dwindle off. Some of them enlist in the military, or they move, or they get a new job schedule, or people just can't make it on time, and
life happens.
We play a lot of in-house games here at Paizo, and when a crunch time happens and we're all crunching to get the next big book out, a lot of games get canceled, and sometimes they just never start up again. You, I suspect all of you are also very used to this. And it's tough in the 21st century when we're all grown-ups with lives to schedule our games regularly. So we want to address all 3 of these and maybe give you some ideas and tactics and approaches of what to do for each of these ways that your game could end, and make it a positive, fun, enjoyable experience regardless of what happens.
And I think one thing to mention early on with this is just the general concept to not put too much pressure on yourself as the GM.
That's right.
And to understand that things will happen, life will happen. Yeah. Maybe the players will do something crazy. Maybe they'll confront that final end boss. Maybe they'll entirely skip half a volume of an AP and you're not expecting it. Or, there will be folks who drop in and drop out. Jake and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, the situation in which you have meticulously planned as the game master for specific players playing specific characters to go through a very narrative-driven arc, and then something happens where half of that group can't show up anymore, or some of those characters die, and then there's a whole new background that's being worked into the campaign setting, and you've sort of got to pivot as the GM.
That's right. So tip number 1, never assume that the players at the end of your campaign are going to be the same players and characters at the beginning of your campaign. Now, that may sound obvious because we've all had player characters die during the campaign or people have dropped out. But sometimes when we're world building and we're campaign building, we can get kind of carried away, and we get a character and we just love that PC so much, or we love these players so much that we build the story around them. And then in 3 weeks, they leave. And you're like, okay, I've designed this perfect campaign that now makes no sense without these characters in it.
And you're doing what you should be doing as a GM, which is engaging that player through their character backgrounds, and maybe you've created an NPC, or maybe you've significantly changed an existing NPC's background to have them feed into something that is in that character's past, or something that motivates the player to remain engaged. And then all of a sudden that player has a work shift change and they can't play in the game anymore.
And if you want an example of how this works in practice, I'm going to go back into the Wayback Machine here and talk about one of my favorite old television shows and an inspiration for my own Starfinder gaming, and that's Babylon 5, JMS's Babylon 5 series. And for those of you that remember, this show came out back in the DS9 era. It was like competing with Star Trek DS9. And for the whole first season, the commander of the Babylon 5 station was an actor named Michael O'Hare, who was playing a character named Sinclair. And he was the star. He was the lead. He was the commander of the station. He was the center of the plot. He had this huge mystery, the whole campaign, like he had this sort of hole in his mind, and what is inside the hole in his mind was the huge deal. The whole campaign was based around it. And yet, what nobody on the show really knew about, except for JMS and the actor himself, was that he was undergoing a lot of really serious mental health issues during this time. And he was having paranoid delusions, and he was trying to self-medicate himself with a lot of alcohol. And it was just a really difficult time for everybody. And so what JMS did was he said, okay, well, let's get you through the end of the first season, and then we'll cut you from the show, and we'll recruit somebody else to take over a new character. And O'Hare ended up dying in 2012. And it was only after he died that JMS revealed all of this to the world. Well, anyway, they hired Bruce Boxleitner, and they had to create a whole new character who became the new captain of the station. And a lot of the subplots that were originally tied to Sinclair's character ended up being tied to Sheridan instead. So Sinclair had a girlfriend who was sort of an archaeologist on a remote planet, and suddenly Boxleitner's character, Sheridan's wife, was an archaeologist who had been on a remote planet. And so you could see some of the sewing together of these plots. But if you want to see how a showrunner takes a challenge of actors, characters, players dropping out in the middle of his campaign, that can be a very illustrative example.
Yeah, I think that translating that to Starfinder, for example, I'm just going to use the name of our iconics because
sure.
They have got iconic roles. They've got iconic party roles. So say you've got someone playing Navasi, and you've got a Navasi who's your charismatic envoy, your leader of your group. She is the one who is the face of the party. She is the
captain of the ship.
She's the captain of the ship. She's the person who is the point of contact for the group when it comes to the jobs that are being taken or the moving the plot forward, and then all of a sudden the player who plays Navasi can no longer be in the game, and you've got this major hole in the party composition. As a GM, you've got a lot of options, and I feel like some of those options might lead more toward the group basically petering out because there's a sort of social psychological decline that happens when people start to leave.
Because it's not so much the fact that Navasi, the character, is gone. It's that the player who took that front role is gone.
And there's a lot of just cognitive load involved in being the player who's, for example, tracking all of the loot that you're finding. I've had players who've made meticulous maps of dungeons that they've been crawling through as the group, and we don't even necessarily realize it, but we are relying on that player. And all of a sudden, if that player leaves, well, now nobody knows where anything is. Because we literally have lost our map.
We've lost it all.
So as a GM, you can take steps to have another player player plug that hole, you can create a GM NPC, a GM PC, and have that hole slowly filled until somebody steps up to take it.
That's right.
It does put the burden on you as the GM, but if you aren't thinking in that direction, ending the campaign and having just no real satisfying ends can be a real danger there.
Yeah, and often it's on you as the GM to fill in for that social role. So if, for example, the party leader has had to leave the game, then you're going to have to provide somebody, an NPC captain, to give the characters instructions. And that may seem contrary to our first impulse. Like, we want the players to call the shots. Well, yes, and they will be, but they often get very uncomfortable telling other players what to do.
It's true.
And so you can give them an NPC, and if that NPC asks for everybody's opinion and then tells them a decision, you're actually helping the players. You're helping them to have fun. In your example of losing the person who was keeping track of all the treasure or who was drawing all the maps, well, now that's your job.
Yeah, somebody has got to pick that up at some point.
You've got to do all that until some other players is willing to do it.
And you can bridge them until they get to that point and make sure that your game doesn't start to peter out. So another thing that you could potentially do if you've got one of those key players who drops out, or you've got some swapping that happens, is that you can feel empowered to take over the narrative arc of that player character and have them have something happen, to explain why they're no longer with the party, but you can have them written a memo basically to the rest of the party, or a diary, or you can have notes that are around, or you can have them contact the party via the internet essentially. You can have lots of different tools that are essentially that character still interacting with the players if that is what is needed to move the game forward.
They can show up for occasional cameos. You can role play their characters for once in a while. And what we've been talking here are all the sort of unintentional endings of a campaign.
Yes.
But I want to talk also about the idea that you might design a campaign with the knowledge that it will end.
Yes. Let's talk about what happens when you, for whatever reason, your game is ending.
Yeah, and you plan it this way. And often we have lofty goals. We want to play our campaigns forever, right? Like, I want to go all the way to level 20 or whatever.
I played a campaign for a decade. Actually, that happened.
But that's very difficult, and often it's hard for players to commit to that kind of a game.
Yeah. It's daunting, right? It's a little intimidating, especially if you're a new player.
And if players have families and they have kids and lives and work, and committing to an ongoing every week thing for indefinite future can be very hard. What I have found successful, and you might try it, is the idea of pitching your game as a kind of seasonal activity. That is, I have like a television season. I have season 1, and season 1 is going to be 8 episodes, or 16 episodes, or 22 episodes, or however many episodes you want it to be. Is it like the first season of Mandalorian, and it's 8, or is it like the first season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was 16, or is it the first 26 or whatever, like a regular television season? And then you can pitch to your players, okay, I'm not claiming your Saturday nights forever. I'm claiming your Saturday nights for the next 8 weeks. Like, okay.
That's right. You don't need to be the dictator GM who's like, you will show up at my house at 6:01 p.m. exactly. You will each bring a piece of flair. You will each bring snacks. If not, then you're out of the game. Nobody wants that.
And then that's just easier for people to commit to. And then you can say, okay, well then if we all are having fun after that 8 episodes, then we'll do another 8. We'll do season 2 or season 3. And of course, the APs are perfect for this, right? Because each AP is its own season.
It can, yes. And I feel like that's kind of a misconception, that folks don't necessarily understand that you don't have to play book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can start at book 3.
Yeah.
And you can create a character that is the appropriate level for that. If that's the adventure you want to run.
You are not cheating.
You're not
when
cheating.
You make a character appropriate to the level of the AP. Like
that's right.
If it's for 8th level characters and you make an 8th level character, the fact that you skipped levels 1 through 7 is not a crime. We are not going to come knocking on your door and arrest you for stealing XP. And then you can run that level, and also you can go off of the AP and come back. They're designed this way. They're designed so that you can temporarily sidetrack and come back. You can pause and come back.
Yep. And in fact, a lot of our Starfinder Society scenarios
That's
are
right.
very good. Like we have a couple of, at least one office game I'm aware of where people have done that. They've run a homebrew thing, and then as an interim, they've run a Starfinder Society
That's right.
scenario, and they bridge very, very well. And Starfinder Society is good for that episodic, TV episode type of thing, if that's what you're aiming for.
So pitch to your audience, pitch to your players a limited time frame, so that they can commit to that with confidence instead of feeling like they have to commit to a indefinite future thing. What else have we got? So we were talking before the stream about the accidental TPK where you kill everybody. And you noted that although this has happened in your game, it's never meant the end of the campaign.
It never has.
Yeah, so
no.
Tell us about that.
No, so TPKs are going to happen. And I feel like, at least in my experience, they happen far more often in home games than they do in any kind of organized play environment.
Yep.
And a lot of that is because I am a very improvisational GM.
Yep.
I used to homebrew everything that I ran. I no longer have time to do that anymore. But when I'm running adventure paths, I will change things sometimes just a little bit and sometimes fairly significantly, mostly to meet the characters' narrative backgrounds and, just improve like the meaning to this particular group of people that I'm running it for. Yeah. Or I'm very realistic and I know like we're never going to get out of book one. So I'm doing things to take out the things that are setting up the longer meta plot, and I'm inserting it as more of a standalone, not a one shot, but a module instead of an adventure path volume. Yeah. I've done that before, but TPKs will happen, and a lot of times it's, characters going into places where they're not necessarily intended to go into. Yeah. And of course, as the GM, you can't just be like, oh, nope, that door is locked and you're not allowed to go in there if they find a way to get in that door. Yeah. So TPKs have happened. And when they do, instead of just saying, well, now the game is over because you guys done screwed up, which is my nice way of saying what we said earlier before, game over, I'm taking my books and table flipping and going home. I do that a lot if that was my intention. But what I would do instead is have them make new characters and have them really think about what are the ramifications of the actions that led up to that TBK. Yeah. Sometimes there are very little, and it's like, well, we literally just chased a giant monster, and the thing, instead of running away, fought us, and we got killed. We screwed up. You
might have the chance to make the rescue squad here, right? Where like the PC, and this is another example.
Rescuing bodies is a thing I've done.
And where
before.
We were just talking about and don't feel like you have to start with a brand new group at first level. Pick back up at the same level the player characters were at.
Oh, absolutely.
They make new characters that come in and grab the bodies or rescue the imprisoned PCs or whatever.
I once had a group that died, and then the replacement characters were all either relatives or in some way personally connected.
Yeah, totally.
And they met themselves because their friends had died, and they were going to find out what it was that killed them, and then that was basically the impetus for that group of PCs to come back.
Yeah, totally.
So Lava Being has a question. Any tips on managing the feel bads between players or towards yourself when there is a TPK? Yeah. Oh, do you have any? I have thoughts. Do you have thoughts?
Well, so this is where I fess up to the fact that my first self-owned publishing company was called TPK Productions. and that was because I had a reputation.
That's because you hate TPKs, right?
No. It's because I had done them a few times, and my players wished to remind me of that. So the first off, it can be hard, especially if the players were really attached to their characters or they're not used to dying.
Or they're very, very invested in characters.
If they get very invested.
And they're getting emotionally upset over this thing. Yeah.
This is, every table is different. Some tables you try to run a kind of, well, the dice said what the dice said, and your character is dead, and I'm sorry. Yep. Other times, we can hand wave that stuff in favor of having a good time. You have to decide how does your table have a good time? Yeah, exactly. Is it more important to let the dice fall where they may, or is it more important that everybody has that sort of positive, heartwarming ending to their characters? In which case, maybe the Dragon's Breath weapon didn't do as much damage as initially thought, or you die, but you actually got captured, or you die, but we're in Starfinder Pathfinder here, so the bad guy can literally resurrect you to get answers from your corpse or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
there's no shortage of ways to bring those characters back from the dead.
You have a lot of options, and being creative
Yeah.
is really a tool and really a positive thing that you can use to your advantage, as opposed to feeling really hemmed in about like, oh my gosh, these characters died, and now I have to come up with all of this new stuff to make this campaign go forward. You really don't. You can just repurpose what you already did.
That's right. And don't let ego or stubbornness stop you from giving the players what they want. If someone is really unhappy that their character is dead, like, it's not worth it to have them dead. Like,
that's true.
It's just not worth it.
Unless you're playing, organized play, in which different. Table variation is not intended to be a thing. You have to stick to the rules as written. Home games are, like Jake said, they're all about the kinds of fun that your table is having, the kinds of story that you specifically want to tell as the GM. I fudge dice all the time at home, and it really just depends on the mood of the table and what's going on. Every TPK I've done, with the exception of maybe one at a convention game, the players were all laughing hysterically, and they were coming back with, okay, yep, we deserved that. We did a stupid thing.
If you can turn the TPK into a memory that the players will talk about forever, then everybody wins, even though they're dead. And it's the craziest thing.
You can create room for all sorts of dramatic, heroic endings for characters when they all kind of have accepted the fact that there's no end game to this, that they're going to die, that it's a dead end. Then maybe the barbarian, has an incredibly epic moment in which he leaps off the cliff and he takes, his giant, we'll say soldier for Starfinder, takes her giant dashko and just cleaves it down the dragon's throat or something, and that dragon still kills them. They fall off the cliff. They are dead. However, there is a very cinematic story now that player can tell for the way that they sacrifice themselves to try to kill this dragon. And you can do that as a GM.
You can either call it the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid moment, or you call it the Thelma and Louise moment, depending on which over the cliff jump you like best.
Exactly. It's like, well, all of the characters did die, but that dragon then was killed, and you saved this tiny town with no technology and no wealth or anything, and you guys have still accomplished something, and players tend to really respond well to that sort of thing, as opposed to, you all just died, now all of these people are going to get screwed over. Good job. You are real heroes. We don't necessarily like to do that.
Never neglect your role as party host. Like, the GM is also a party host as much as you're a rule arbiter or an actor or everything else.
Yes. There's a very good question from Lori 7x3 who says, how do you like to end a campaign? Happy ending, grim, sad, or double-edged?
Sure.
So I would say none of those, and all of those, as long as the ending is satisfying.
Yeah. If a campaign is going to end, and everyone realizes that it's going to end, and even if you tell them, like, okay, I think we're going to probably wrap up this game in a couple of episodes, how does everybody feel about that? There can be a risk. Sometimes the energy level of the campaign will drift out. Like, everyone's like, oh, well, then it doesn't really matter what I do because we're going to end in 2 weeks. Or I never really found out the answer to this mysterious question about my character. And we can find sometimes as a GM that we're challenged to try to wrap up everybody's plot lines and give everybody a perfect sewn up ending just in time for that last episode. And honestly, after a lot of attempts, I've decided this might be kind of a losing game. What's more important is that last session, those last 3 hours, are super enjoyable.
Yes.
If you don't tell the ranger who their mysterious parents are, it's okay. They'll forgive you as long as they had a really great time for that last 3 hours.
That's true.
They'll go out with a positive memory, and they'll realize that you didn't get around to answering everything. But it's kind of like Return of Skywalker. Like, screw it.
And
we'll get by.
Yeah, and there's one thing that you brought up that I think has a lot of potential, in which it's like, okay, something has caused the campaign to happen. Maybe it's by design. You know that all the players can't make it for the next 2 months, so we're just going to end the campaign in the middle of a book or something. But one device that I think is really useful is that epilogue that we talked about.
That's right.
So if you, like Jake said, you need to end the campaign and you can't really answer the major questions about who the Rangers' parents were, but you can answer something that makes the players feel like they've accomplished something. You can always have like an after action report, which doesn't even need to happen at the table. You can write out an email. I used to do that a lot when I was running campaigns and provide a little bit of 2 years later, here's how the party is faring. And that really makes the players feel like that they have accomplish something that's got some staying power, and maybe they pick up those characters later.
We played this game for 12 weeks. Ask me anything.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Like, and then the players can ask you, hey, what was up with that guy in that one town? And you're like, well, let me tell you the story of that one guy in that town. And you never got to it, but here's what it was. And also, like you say, you can do sort of readouts of what happens to all of the characters after the story is over. That could be a lot of fun.
Yeah. You can also just feel free to improvise if you, at the very last minute, know that, oh, this session is going to be our last session.
Yeah.
And there is some sort of lingering mystery, like there's an android with a special tattoo, and you have this plan for the android to slowly uncover what this tattoo meant, and it was a link to their past life or something like that. You can always rejigger those plans if you want to, and say there is a big bad that they end up fighting or confronting, or they discover something, well, instead of having the tattoo be found, in the bottom of an ancient temple on Castrovel, and having it explained that it's, an old elven ritual. Well, maybe there's the same tattoo that's on that bad guy, and there's a little bit of an explanation about how they're connected, and it's totally different from what you planned, but it still gives a payoff.
Totally different than what you planned. You got to be flexible and be able to rewrite. This highlights one of the main differences between your table games and live play games.
Yeah.
Many of us are starting to get informed by what we see happening in live play, and many people that might be new to the hobby might think that's how the game is played. I see it on live play. I watch Knights of Everflame or something, and I'm like, okay, well, that's how the game should go.
Yeah.
Not always. They do things differently. For example, that game will end on a cliffhanger. Right? It ends on a cliffhanger because it has a very specific reason, because they want you to come back next season.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
They want you, but if you're at the table, like, don't do that to your players. Don't end it on a cliffhanger, even though it might seem really fun. But if you don't know when you're going to play again, give them a satisfying finish.
Yes.
Let them walk away feeling like they got the end of a story and they had a really great time. Unless your players are so into cliffhangers. If that's what they'll enjoy, then sure, go ahead, give it to them.
And you can always take the movie sort of tactic of, well, we've wrapped up the plot, and now there is an after-credit scene.
The hand
that's crawling up, right? That's indicating maybe there is a sequel, and that could be another campaign, or it could just be an interesting thing for them to discuss.
That's right.
There is a very interesting comment in chat that says, of course, everybody aims for happy people, but I like to have double-edged endings, like when they can't be sure if they really did the right or the best thing.
Yeah, totally,
which is interesting.
It's the moral dilemma. And a lot of this is, back when we had water coolers, we would call this the water cooler conversation, right? But the idea is that you don't just leave the players with a good time, you leave them with something to really think about.
Yeah.
And I really encourage you to do this. And I think whoever brought this up, it's a good idea. And a lot of this is seeded at the beginning of the campaign and all throughout the campaign. I'm going to get a little bit, sort of artsy here, but I really think that gaming can be about more than simply sitting on the table, eating pretzels and chips and rolling dice. We can say something and we can ask really tough questions about really important issues. Now, we all do it through metaphor and allegory, and we disguise it and we talk about it through all kinds of, different ways. But ultimately, you can get at these really tough moral dilemmas and moral questions. And I'll use an example from Starfinder Society, because one of my
I've got an example in my head
there you go. There you go.
For it.
So I wrote an adventure for Thirsty. This is back in season 1, and it was what lies beneath, but that wasn't the exact name. It was related. It was like that. But anyway, the players land on this unexplored, undiscovered planet, and while they're exploring it, they uncover. I don't want to spoil anything too serious, but they uncover an alien life form. And they have to decide what to do with this alien life form, and there are no good options.
Right.
There's just a matter of which version of suck do you want, and
what's not going to come bite you in the future. It's
a tough call, and it's designed to be that. It's supposed to be a tough call, so that after the adventure's over, and everyone's got their XP, and you've all got all your rewards and stuff. But now you go to other people and you ask them, say, what did you do in that adventure? And you can compare notes. And this becomes part of building the community of role play, where people compare what they did and they tell their own version of that story. So do that thing. You're right. That's a good idea.
Yeah. It's
You had your own.
much more interesting, I think, to end a campaign or to go toward the denouement, basically, of what's happening in the campaign with questions and options, as opposed to you have in your head what the ending is going to be.
Right.
It is much harder to do as a GM because you might have to go off script. If you're running an AP, you may have to adjust the ending. You may have to come up with something entirely different than what's published. But I feel like that it's a much more enjoyable situation for the players who have felt like that they have affected the change, that they have committed to a decision. They've made a decision. They've committed to that decision, and that decision has affected the world and had ramifications moving forward. There is an example. It's actually from Pathfinder, but it's from the time travel AP, The Return of the Rune Lords.
Oh, yeah. Remember.
So number 5, The City Outside of Time, in which you literally go to Zenodasserol, which is the frozen city in time that Belimarius, the Rune Lord.
Did you write that?
I did.
Ah,
yes.
nice.
Yes. So Rune Lord Belimarius was the leader of that city, and she had it under her iron fist, and she's a Rune Lord, and she's extremely a powerful mage. And you go there as the player characters, and you're trying to get a MacGuffin, but you're trying to work out what's going on. And there's all of this political intrigue.
There's all these factions
that's
in the
happening.
city.
Yeah, there's factions.
I wasn't in the editorial team at the time, so I was editing.
Okay. So you're familiar with what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out how you're going to navigate these political factions to be able to get access to what you need as the MacGuffin, which is in the middle of Belimarius' palace. And you can walk straight in there, and you can talk to Belimarius, and you can interact with her. And she is struggling to try to regain control over the city after the time explosion has happened. And she will try to ally with you if you're not immediately opposing her. But there's also like a refugee freedom fighter faction that you can be the people's hero, and you can try to take back the city and oust the Rune Lord and, get them out from under her iron fist. There's also a giant faction that is essentially broken free from being controlled by the Belimariuses. They're rune giants. And so there's a rune giant queen that you can talk to. So there are all of these options, and there's one that is more of a moral choice.
Yes.
But not necessarily depending on the other things that have happened in the city. And so you've got to commit to something, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to get what you need. Yeah. And so you've got to make that decision, and your characters need to be okay with what happens as the ramifications of those decisions. And there are certainly choices that happen in which it is very clear that you have allied with some not nice people if that's the choice that you make.
Yeah. Sometimes players will go for those choices because sometimes players are eager to make a sacrifice to get the tough choice, right? Like if I have to give up something to win, I will happily do that. Yeah. A lot of this goes back though to our earlier maxim, which is figure out what your players most enjoy. Yeah. If we say, well, we want you to have a good time at the table, that might mean tough decisions, because that's what your players like. But if your players are just here to kill lots of monsters, then just give them a big monster, and you'll probably be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have got a question from Lori, who says, what if you have a TPK on the final boss? Do you let your party keep facing it until it's dead, or do you end it and let them know how bad they failed the world? That's a really interesting question. What would you do in that situation?
Well, if it is literally the world hanging in the balance. So I have had this situation. It was a Star Trek game, actually. Okay. And the players accidentally blew up the Alpha Quadrant. But it was a one shot. It was like I was doing a one shot session. I probably would not do it that way again. If looking in hindsight, I probably would not have the players responsible for the world blowing up. Maybe there would be some. What I should have done, and if it had not been a one shot, I might have thought of this. I don't know. Is give the big bad guy some reason to delay, right? So that the PCs can either take a second shot at it, or other characters can come in. But that's kind of unsatisfying, because if they've been playing the main characters all the way through.
Yeah.
Having a batch of replacements come in at the last minute probably won't be.
So what's really interesting as an option in that kind of situation is if you've got a situation like what Lori's describing, the PCs have gone up against the big bad and they have failed, and they've probably failed spectacularly.
Probably, yes.
And their little pieces of PC's armor is getting picked out of the teeth of that boss, and it is just not a good situation. You can always kind of Rogue One it. And what I mean by that is that you can have had that TPK mean something, so that it has lowered the defenses of the monster, or it has made the monster cocky, or it has in some way created a vulnerability for that end monster. And then the next party of PCs know what happened through whatever way you want to express it as the GM. Maybe they are able to get some communications back. Maybe one person survives long enough to drag themselves back to the starship and type up a report and send it off and through the infosphere, and then they just expire in a very dramatic death scene. I would make the player make the death noises just because I'm awful. But if that then creates a vulnerability for that boss, then the other group of PCs can come in and exploit that. And it can be held up as a look at the sacrifice that these group of heroes did so that we can then be then we can bring this home, and then the players are invested in not letting that death be in vain, and coming up with solutions that are going to basically help you as the GM wrap up that narrative in a very tight little bow.
Ask your players if this is if they all died in a TPK fighting the final boss. Is your campaign necessarily over? If you have planned it to be X many episodes, and this was going to be the last episode, and everybody knows this is the last game, okay. But if it's not, if it's a continuing campaign, and everybody's still in, it's just that they all died.
Yep.
And do you know the game Midnight at all? The
I
RPG
don't.
Midnight?
No.
It's an RPG that's based on the idea that Sauron wins.
Oh, interesting.
So it's set in like a alternate version of it's not really the Lord of the Rings. It's not really Middle Earth, but it's very like that. It's epic high fantasy.
Yep. It's not Tolkien. Don't sue us.
Except that the Dark Lord has won.
Okay.
And has taken over everything.
Okay.
And the players are like this lonely freedom fighters in this basically very bleak version of Middle Earth.
Yep. So there's this implied massive conflict that happens. It is not resolved in a good way, and then the players come in.
Yeah, so the Dark Lord wins, and you can play that campaign. Like if the players are up for it, and this is the ultimate expression of decisions and consequences matter, right? The universe, the world isn't destroyed. It's just really miserable, and your players become the new champions, starting all over again at first level, trying to fix the mistake of your last set of player characters who failed to save the world.
Oh,
right?
Interesting. Yeah.
You may not have time and the scope for that, but even a 4-episode series could be enough to address that failure on the part of the PCs.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. That makes me think of a situation that's happened to me in the past in which a TPK does happen in a game. It is unexpected. It is something that the party got in over their head. They got killed by they got overrun by undead. And the GM basically turned to us and said, do you want to keep playing this game, or do you want to shift to something else?
Yeah.
Which I think is a very valid question, because the group was still intact.
That's right.
Nobody had any reason to drop out. Nobody really wanted to drop out, but it was, like Jake said, it was an episodic break. So it allowed the players to think like, oh no, we want to keep going on that, and then let the GM figure out, okay, how are we going to structure a second group of heroes?
That's right.
Or other people be like, you know what? No, I'd rather play this other game or this other system or something.
It can be an opportunity for a really something special. Like if you say, look, then you can imagine telling that story at your local game store, right? Where you're like, we all died, and then we all came back as like our original characters' kids 20 years later.
Oh, that's a fun thing to do.
All that.
That's a fun thing to do. Yeah, playing multi-generational characters in a game that's unintentionally sort of a chapter 2 because everybody has died.
Everybody died.
That's a really fun thing to do. It's harder to do that with published material, I think.
Yes.
But it can be done, and totally. It doesn't have to be entirely homebrew.
Totally can.
Yeah. So we've got another question from Lori. What was your most memorable campaign ending? Have you got anything for this one?
Oh, gosh.
I know. I'm going to have to think.
I mean, there's been so many campaigns over the years, and some of them did end in TPKs, but they become good memories, nevertheless. my players will never let me forget when I created a kind of pyramid, like a dungeon crawl in a pyramid, and I had a secret room in there, kind of inspired by Tomb of Horrors, right? Well, so there was a fake tomb, and then the actual tomb. And the players discovered the fake tomb, and they fought the white inside, and they thought, yay, we killed the lich. Okay, it wasn't a lich, guys. It was a white.
Yeah.
But then they just knew somehow that there must still be something left in there that they hadn't uncovered. And so they searched everywhere. Like they detect magic, the entire pyramid.
They're just walking over.
Until they finally found the invisible secret door. And then like the first character died because he couldn't pick the magic trap on the door. So he got killed by lightning bolts. And then they went in and they all started to die off. Like it was an undead trap like you. It was like they swarmed by undead.
Yep.
So it's
amazing how much that happens.
and the mummy got one of the players with mummy rot.
Ooh, yeah.
So
that persistent stuff is the worst.
two characters actually lived through the encounter, but one of them died from mummy rot on the way back to town. Yeah. Like they couldn't get back to
No. So you just slow down. You've got the slow motion scene of all of a sudden you feel weak and you are starting to have trouble putting one foot in front of the other. So and then you fall over and then you slump.
And he gave me the look that made me feel so bad. Like I really did feel guilty for that one. So yeah. And then the ranger lived. And everyone made new characters. She was still playing the ranger, and in the very next encounter, she died. It was so anticlimactic. It was terrible. It was like, sometimes the dice just betray your story.
Yeah, I know that is true. A lot of mine have been very anticlimactic too. Oh gosh, I've had that's the thing is like I've just had a lot too. I want to say, thinking back, I had a campaign where it was basically kind of a very traditional, massive orc war.
Yes.
That was intended to be actually kind of an infiltration, sort of intrigue sneaking type of campaign.
But they charged it.
They charged it, yeah, and they were supposed to get captured, and they were supposed to try to find their way out of it. And what actually ended up happening was them, instead of finding the boss, and assassinating the king of this situation, they talked to them and they ended up kind of allying and kind of bringing them around the other side, and then they end up with a situation of they've got this king who's supporting their goals and has decided that they no longer want to take over this nation, but his whole army has the previous idea, and so it ended up being that they were having to fight all of these lieutenants instead of taking down this king, which that's a fun thing.
It worked.
Yeah. So do we have any other thoughts for specifically attrition? We talked a little bit about what happens.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like that is the more unexpected way for a campaign to end.
We often can. Sometimes we have high hopes that when a player drops out, and we've got a lot of story plots built around that character, that new players will take over that character and will play that character and will say like, well, we just lost the cleric. If you want to take over for the cleric, let's face facts. Nobody wants to play somebody else's character.
Exactly.
Almost never happens.
And you should never force people to do that either, because it's just not fun.
It would be nice if that happened, but just like pre-gens, like honestly, people play pre-gens by necessity, not by choice, right?
It depends. I mean, I've played a few bone keeps in my time where I specifically took Seal in because it's just like, you know what, we're just gonna go until everybody dies, and I've got my lay on hands, and we're gonna do this.
Sometimes pre-gens are really fun. Like all of the Skitter adventures that Keeley writes, for example.
Yes, all of those are super fun.
Super fun.
Got a new one coming out this year too.
We do. But don't try to force an old PC on a new player.
Yep. Go ahead.
Be open to new people joining the game if you are losing players. We remember that new players are the blood of our hobby.
Yeah.
Like we cannot make it without new people, and you might meet some pretty cool faces. Like,
that's true.
I run a campaign here for a really obscure like 1980s game, and But I went onto like the local Facebook group and I had 4 strangers in 48 hours. You know?
Oh yeah,
and
there's so much hunger for people wanting to play games.
And we met at the local game store, and they are delightful people, and we are on like 5 months, right? So just keep an open mind. It doesn't have to be the ending. Maybe if you're willing to open your social circle to some new folks.
Yeah, and Simple Simon has a very good point that new people equals new ideas. And just, as we're talking up here about being the puppet master GM who always has a trick up their sleeves and in their back pocket, and is really just kind of making everything up, but shh, don't tell anybody that. One of the real secrets is that your best ideas come from your players.
Totally.
And if you're playing with the same group of people for a decade, which, I did when I was younger, that can be very good because you build up a rapport and you know each other really well, and you know exactly what they're going to do in character because you've been in the same situation 5 different times before. That has value, but what also really, really has value is brand new people who come in and they just totally, throw a wrench into things, and they come up with these ideas that the group wouldn't have previously considered. And you as a GM can really riff off of those types of ideas.
And it can be the game of a lifetime for a player like that who comes into a session where like, oh, everybody else, imagine you're like, I joined this new Pathfinder group. I was going to say D&D there for a second. Forgive me. But you join a new you join a new RPG group, and they've been playing the same game for 10 years. Yeah. And you're like, wow, really? Yeah, seriously. And in other words, your ongoing campaign could be the story of a lifetime to that new player.
Yeah, and you are talking it up to them. The other players are saying things that happened 4 or 5 years ago, and it's this very like family type of atmosphere, and for them to be able to join that can really mean a lot to a new player, and it can bring that new lifeblood into your group.
You know what I find is great is that we started off talking about how campaigns end, but we're really talking about how you can keep them from ending.
It's true, yeah. I mean, because I think like that's all of our sort of super secret evil goal is we don't want to stop playing.
You don't want to stop playing.
Yeah. So we have a good question that I think came from Peyton. So he just wants to know things, don't you, Peyton?
Thanks for calling me out.
Thanks for giving us a fake question, Peyton. So, Peyton wants to know, what advice do you have for players looking to transition from an adventure path to a homebrew campaign?
Well, so this is going to happen. As you are playing through an adventure path, your players are going to get creative, and they're going to have their own stories that don't interact with the things that we write into the path. Yeah. We don't know your players. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what they're going to come up with. But your players are really creative, and they're going to come up with plots, and they're going to latch on to characters that we had no idea they would latch on to, because you never know what.
And NPCs will become way more important than maybe they were supposed to be, or in the case of streamed games that I've run in the past, they will not exist in the printed product because you made them up.
So, you will not need to be GMing for very long, before you will have all of these homebrew plots happening.
All these threads.
And my advice is to go for it. Like, I really encourage you to do this. And spending a couple of hours before a session plotting your own adventure, going off of the adventure path, and maybe you'll come back to it, maybe you won't. Like, that's not a pressure. The rest of the adventure path will still be talking about the same plot and the same world, so you'll get tons of ideas. There's still all those monsters and settings and all that cool stuff that's in the adventure path. Yeah. But then it becomes a toolbox for you rather than a script. Right?
Exactly.
So it becomes a toy box. You go, okay, you can play with what you want, and you can, and if you want to go back to the story at some point, you can. But maybe you're going to have more fun just doing your own thing.
That's true.
That's the beauty of the game.
Yeah, and the reality is that our adventure paths they certainly don't end at 20th level. We have got, I think, one Pathfinder 1 at this point that does that, but this one ends at 13th level. Yeah. And so, if you've got a very solid group and you finish the entire story, it's going to be a pretty common thing that you're going to want to keep playing.
Now, we have announced Extinction Arc.
Yes, Devastation Arc.
Devastation Arc.
Yes.
Devastation Arc. Yeah. I got confused with Extinction Curse. The Devastation Arc, which is a 3-volume high-level AP.
It does go to 20.
It picks up from level 13, so you can pick it up after any of our ongoing APs. Eon's Throne ends at like level 7 or 8. When does that?
Yeah, 7, because then Signal of Screams.
Yeah,
you can go straight into that if you want.
But if you finish Signal of Screams or Dead Suns or Dawn of Flame.
Dawn of Flame, yeah.
You can pick right up with Extinction Devastation arc. Did it again. You can pick right
Extinction
up with
Devastation.
Yeah.
Or Curse.
And this is our first one. It's our first high level arc, and it's like I can't wait. I've been working on it since I came onto the dev team.
Yeah.
I'm developing some of the back matter for it, some of the articles, the monsters, the gadgets and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that really leads very well into Parkour Man's question that he posted that they posted a few minutes ago. Do you have ideas for how to reverse transition going from homebrew to an adventure path?
Okay.
And I feel like what you were saying, you were already kind of answering that question.
Yeah. Okay, well, so you have a couple of very different challenges here, and Parkour Man, I don't know what your situation is. Are you in a homebrew setting, or are you in the packed worlds just doing your own adventure?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you can imagine one of these challenges is much greater than the other. If you're already in the packed worlds, then you're okay, right? Like you can pretty much meld into any one of these APs pretty easily.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, you do kind of have to have some buy-in. Get some player buy-in on this. Like ask them.
Yes.
I'm thinking about running Dawn of Flame, for example. You guys are already level 7.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be starting with like the 4th adventure in the AP. What do you think of that? And once everyone's on board, they will help you integrate their characters. You'll be like, okay, well, the adventure's on the sun, so let's come up with reasons for your characters to go to the sun, right?
Yeah. There's that. Yeah.
Yeah, like the second adventure in that AP is where you steal the ship that lets you go into the sun.
Yes.
Well, maybe we've got a way for your ship that you already have to do that, so that we don't have
adjustments.
Yeah. But you might be in the other situation where you're doing a homebrew setting, and you like an AP so much that you want to go into that in your homebrew setting. Well, then you've got a lot more work set out for you. But you can totally do it. Just be very liberal with how you change things in the plot.
Yep.
We don't have unlimited pages when we write these APs. We've got 64 pages for a Starfinder chapter. So, multiply it out by 6. You can do the math. There's just not enough pages for us to cover every eventuality. And so we know, the point of me bringing all this up is, we know you're going to change it. You're going to change it. That's good. That's exactly what you should be doing. You are not doing anything wrong. When you throw out whole NPCs, when you change bad guys around, you don't like the boss. You want to get rid of that boss. You want to add a whole new different one. That one that you know your players will like, or one that's got a link into that's the same species as one of your favorite PCs. Do that thing. Like do that thing. And the more that you change it, the more tailored it'll be to your players. And you are not, once again, there are no fun police. They're going to come along and arrest you. Right?
Yes. And I would recommend that if you are doing that, if you are doing the work that it requires to go in a homebrew setting and you're modifying an adventure path to be a continuation of a game that you've already started in that homebrew setting, I would really encourage you to read through either the whole adventure path or the whole module that the whole volume that you're going to run, because, and I used to run into this a long time ago when I would I would read them and then I would run them immediately, or I would not read all the way through the entire volume before I run, is that you could really set some traps for yourself as the GM if you're trying to make that many changes on the fly, or all of a sudden, there is just some impossibility that wouldn't happen in your homebrew world. And that's written into the book because that's part of the Starfinder universe. I would recommend really just doing a lot of sort of research, and it is more work, like Jake mentioned.
Don't neglect your prep.
Exactly.
I mean, this sounds like an actor, sort of talking to to other actors, but there is a lot of prep involved with GMing. The good news is that we make these books really beautiful to read, and we make them really nice products. So you'll have fun doing your research.
Yes.
But you need to read the adventure. You need to know it really well.
Yeah.
Make a lot of notes. Write all over it. You're not going to resell the thing on eBay. So write all over it.
And don't stress out about trying to keep it as close to the script as possible, because you've already changed the script by playing in a different campaign setting.
Yeah,
so
and
don't worry about it.
If you have to retcon things in between sessions, your players are
That's true. That does happen.
Like I just told, I know last week I said it was going to be 3 days to Akaton, but it's actually 7.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was doing the math or looking at it or something.
We did
like
it wrong last time.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I just want to call out Wither King for a moment, who says, if you're not in the Pact Worlds, maybe a Witch Warper pops up and Witch Warps the world. I love that idea. I
Yeah.
think that's fantastic. And we all know that the theory of infinite universes is true, right?
If your players are up for simply moving universes, you can totally do that.
You can,
It's a
and
science
that would be
fantasy
really
site.
fun because then you could pull in little elements that
Yes.
remind them of the previous world that they were in. So if it is literally you are in an alternate universe version of what has happened, maybe there are still ramifications of the events that happened previously, but they've manifested in these different ways. And maybe that's a big question in the game is like, what happened and how did we get here?
And it doesn't
that
even
can drive
need
you
to be
forward.
an alternate universe because
doesn't.
the current campaign that you are currently playing in your homebrew setting could just be some group of planets in the vast.
It's true, yeah.
Right? And
you
you
could
can,
be anywhere.
5 days, 6 days drift travel, and you're in the Pact Worlds.
Well, and that's interesting too, because then it's like, well, what happens when a Pact World ship makes contact with that planet?
Yeah,
and
there
that
you go.
can be the way that you
There you go.
are transitioning over to the Pact Worlds. Maybe somebody shows up from Absalom
It
Station.
doesn't have to be one universe or the other. You can
Yeah.
put your hands together, right?
And that's
Like-
the fun thing about Starfinder in the Vast is that literally anything can exist,
Yes.
and we're not limiting you by saying there are only 11 planetoids in the
Right,
Pact World
right,
system.
right.
It literally anything can exist, and that's why we've got the planets in the back of every AP
That's right.
volume. And it is not limited to what we've published. There's an infinite world of possibilities out there. From Pact Worlds to Schmacked Worlds. Why are you stealing from my GM book, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Unless we have any other questions, we've only got a few minutes here.
Yeah.
So, do you have any parting thoughts to offer our audience on Twitch here?
Well, gosh, for ending our campaigns, we've talked about a lot of games over the last hour, but try not to stress over it too much, right? Like, let the game organically tell you when it's over. And everyone can enjoy it.
And try not to stretch it out too long.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, artificially.
I've had players come to me and say, "Look, like this game is fun. We like it, but it's not as fun as it was."
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe we can try.
Bored.
Maybe we can try something else, right?
Yeah.
Because they got to high level and the math was just starting to get kind of burdensome.
that happens.
And then, like, it became math club, and we don't really like math club. So let's go back to something maybe lower level and more gritty, where we're more at risk.
Sure. Yeah.
And where we have to learn the rules of the universe over again.
Sure. Yeah.
That is not a condemnation of you as a GM. It does not mean you have failed. Everyone is still your friend. And it's an opportunity. Because if you were like me and Amanda, you have shelves full of games that you want to run and have never gotten around to running.
I go to conventions, I'm like, oh, yay, I'm going to get things from the Flood. I really like Tales from the Loop. Have I played that game? Have I run that game in a year?
No.
No, I have not.
But you loved buying it.
I did. I ran around the entire convention for like 2 hours trying to find it.
I got, not Blades in the Dark, but the next two. I got...
Scum and Villainy?
Scum and Villainy and the military one.
Oh, yeah. I forget the name of that one.
And I was like, I can't wait to run these.
Yes.
Have I? No, I have not even touched them.
I have Blades in the Dark, and I've only played Scum and Villainy.
You're in like the... Yeah.
We do things
but anyway,
we can never discuss on camera.
To every ending...
Forlornly at the Aliens RPG.
Yes.
Yeah.
every ending of a campaign is a possible new campaign, right? Like
it's very true.
Now you have that weekly slot in your calendar open again, and you can go back to that wonderful moment when you're looking at all of your games, looking at all of your empty paper and thinking, what do I want to run?
Yes, which is so much fun.
It is so much fun.
And it's so much fun as a player, too, to have your GM be like, I'm thinking about running Call of Cthulhu now in this slot. And be like, yes, I've always wanted to play Call of Cthulhu.
Yes, which, by the way, it is no shame to die in Call of Cthulhu.
I think you're kind of supposed to die.
You're kind of supposed to die, yeah. So if your players are having trouble with TPKs, just nurse them along in a little Call of Cthulhu for a while.
I think the last Call of Cthulhu game I played, I was the only character who survived the module. Everybody else died.
Masking your Harlothotep, my players all died multiple times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So parting thoughts about ending a campaign is a thing that I recommend that I really like to try to do. And a lot of this is my own personal style. So, grain of salt and all of that. But I really like cinematic set pieces. I really like setting up a major confrontation, or that there is some, major manifestation of the narrative arc, or there is something that is really visually memorable that's happening, even if it is just like a scene showing, you know, the big dragon that's being, you know, controlled by, you know, whatever the big bad is, the Bone Sage or whatever, getting into a giant battle with some other type of major creature, something like that just feels epic and that feels very satisfying, and that can give the players that motivation to like, okay, we're gonna have the best game of our lives now because we've got to stop this thing that's happening, or there's the bad guy up there on the cliff, we're gonna push him off, or whatever. Like having some sort of set piece that you can really end on with a high note and keep the energy level high as the last session, I think will keep players coming back and wanting to play in your games more often. And that's really what we're here for, is like Jake said, secretly, we just never want to stop playing.
That's the truth.
All right.
Thanks to everybody for coming.
Thank you all so much. We are right at 5 o'clock, so we are going to sign off for this week. But next week we'll have another show for you, and we'll look for you back on Starfinder Wednesday next week.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.